Hello, welcome to BBC News special coverage of the Tory leadership race result. I'm Maryam Moshiri here in central London, and it's been a long 4 months for Tory MPs and members as the party decides its next leader after the election defeat and the resignation of the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. It's not long to go before we find out the result. Will it be Kemi Badenoch, the former Business Minister, or will it be Robert Jenrick, the former Immigration Minister? Both of those candidates have been put forward after 6 candidates put themselves forward at the beginning of this race, all the way back in July. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Chris Mason, who is here with me. Chris, Kemi Badenoch is the favourite in terms of the polls, but in the world of politics, you just never know.
You never know, not least because this is a race whose electorate is Conservative Party members, 100,000 odd members scattered hither and thither around the UK. How on earth do you accurately poll a collection of people like that? Short answer, it's not easy. So yeah, Kemi Badenoch is seen as the favourite. I just bumped into one of her supporters though, and they're feeling powerless because there's this gap between the polls closing, the last chance that Conservative Party members had to vote on Thursday evening, and the result in about 10 minutes' time. And there's nothing they've been able to do in that window. Now, the 2 candidates, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, are going to be told around about now, in private, in this building in central London. They're then going to have to put on the ultimate poker face as they walk into the room behind us in public, into a room full of people who do not know the result, in order to hear its public announcement. And this matters. It matters in terms of the extent to which the Conservatives can be competitive again come the next general election. But it matters for a bigger reason from that day to day, which is that good government requires good opposition and coherent opposition. And the big challenge for whoever it is, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, is to assemble a coherent opposition that can take on the government just as it set out its big policy prospectus with the budget the other day.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much indeed. I'll let you go into that room where the announcement is set to be made in around about 10 minutes' time. Let's now take a look at how we have arrived at this point with our political correspondent, Tom Simons.
Age of 16, I came to Britain from Nigeria.
Every political journey starts with an origin story.
I saw how poverty of ambition left many from disadvantaged backgrounds on the scrap heap.
I joined this party aged 16 in 1997 in Wolverhampton. There were not many 16-year-old Conservatives in Wolverhampton in 1997. There were not many Conservatives in Wolverhampton in 1997.
I paid my way through college, working in McDonald's, flipping burgers, cleaning loos, and I learned firsthand that earning your own money rather than relying on others gives you not just more freedom, but more dignity.
I always feel that Margaret Thatcher was a great success for this country.
One of his children has Thatcher for a middle name, apparently. Both of the leadership candidates tend to the right of the party, but their tactics differ. Kemi Badenoch seems keen on big emotional ideas. No to gender-neutral toilets, prison for leaky civil servants, a joke, she said. British values over what she called less valid cultures.
Which cultures, in your view, are less valid than others?
Oh, lots. Cultures that believe in child marriage, for instance, or that women don't have equal rights. I actually think it's extraordinary that people think that's an unusual or controversial thing to say.
What is the point of difference between us? I think it's quite clear that I have set out a really strong diagnosis of what's gone wrong. I have set out very clear policies which would mark a big change for the party.
And there's one he never stops talking about.
One which I believe is existential to our party and critical to the future of our country, is our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. The court is not even a court anymore. It is making laws now.
Our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists because our lawyers tell us that if they're caught, the European court will set them free.
Do you know this has happened or this is happening now?
There are instances where the ECHR is forcing or leading the decision makers to take lethal action. You could have said that in your video. For example, by calling in. Let me just finish the point. It's an important one.
But this is what
by
you
calling
said
in a
your
drone
video.
strike.
You reduced that to a.
He took some heat for that, but he's sticking with the policy idea.
Who do you think you're speaking to, Secretary of State?
Kemi Badenoch has ruffled feathers too, including here the Speaker's, a breach of parliamentary protocol.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise.
But whichever of these two becomes leader, they're going to have to fight to rebuild their party's politics from scratch. She once said good politics is messy. He saw it as confronting hard truths. For one of them, the job starts today. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Yeah, there we go.
So it is really a feeling of anticipation and excitement here in central London as Tory members who voted over the past 15 or so days, and before them Tory MPs who voted as well to whittle down those 6 to 2, await the result of that leadership race. Well, I'm joined here by two people who know a thing or two about these leadership race. Selma Shah is a political advisor and former Conservative advisor and political analyst, and Henry Hill is deputy editor of Conservative Home. It's good to talk to both of you. Thank you for coming here. The room behind us is full at the moment. We're thinking, aren't we, looking at the polls, that Kemi Badenoch is the person who is going to be announced. But as I mentioned to Chris earlier, you never know in the world of politics.
No, you don't know, and there could be an upset or a surprise because, of course, nobody's really been able to do that deep analysis of, what are associations thinking, what are members thinking. The polling can only give you a snapshot in time as to what's going on. And we've had ballots, a couple of weeks ago, whether anything's changed and how many people have voted late. So all of that is to calibrate, but it does look like Kemi Badenoch is the favourite at this moment in time.
What's the difference, Henry, between the two candidates?
Well, they were both initially on the right of the contest compared to James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat, the more plausible candidates of the One Nation wing. At this point, I would say the biggest dividing line is simply that Robert Jenrick has been much more explicit about what he wants to do. He's made some very specific policy proposals on things like immigration, which people can agree with or disagree with, whereas Kemi has kept it much, much more big picture. She's said that the problem was that the party talked right but governed left, but she hasn't said what that meant in practice or what governing right would look like. So
it's because she doesn't know what she wants to do, or she's hedging her bets?
Well, this is the interesting question. She's promised a grand review of basically all areas of policy after she becomes leader, which something has to happen. There has to be a reckoning for the party with why the last election was such a catastrophic defeat. I think the interesting thing for Kemi will be she's being supported, got a very broad range of support, but a lot of those supporters will want different things. And if she does become leader, how is she going to maintain that unity that she prizes so highly if and when she has to start making divisive decisions?
And that's an interesting question, isn't it, Selma? What's the answer?
I mean, that's what all leaders have to do. It's time immemorial. To borrow a phrase, the Conservative Party is a broad church, and keeping all those factions together has always been what Conservative Party leaders, prime ministers, and indeed even Labour prime ministers need to do. There is a way that actually you can bring that consensus together. There are inevitably going to be fights as we go through this. There is never going to be a perfect answer or a perfect leader, but ultimately it's about how you deal with the challenges that are presented in front of you with a piece of vision, I agree, but all that can be maintained and sort of brought round in the round when we have a victor.
History tells us that a new leader of an opposition, after a heavy electoral defeat, probably, according to historical context, won't then become Prime Minister. I mean, when the Labour Party lost in 2010, that was 14 years before they came back to power. So what do you think that tells us about how this new leader is going to lead the party, Henry?
Well, their job number one, essentially, is to find reasons for the public and the press to pay attention to the Conservative Party, because with Labour having such a big majority, even if things do keep going badly and their poll ratings keep sliding, there's more than enough Labour backbenchers for them to have a very engaging, multi-sided civil war that doesn't involve the Tories at all. Yeah. So the Tory leader needs to find a way to get themselves into the conversation. I think compared to, say, 97 or even Labour in 2010, there is more potential for the Tories to come back, because in terms of seat majorities, this is a very, very marginal parliament. I think a 1% swing would deliver 50 Tory MPs, a 2% swing would deliver 100. So there's plenty of scope, in theory, for the Conservatives to be much more competitive in 2029 than, say, they were in 2001. But on the flip side, they are going to have to compete with Reform, for Media Oxygen, the Liberal Democrats. It's a much more fractured political landscape than it was 20 years ago.
And that's the key, isn't it, Salma? The political landscape for the right is much more fractured. And the key, I guess, many people are saying now is for them to bring the right together again.
Well, it's not just about the Conservative Party. All political parties are fractured. You have kind of like the progressive left that also has made a lot of gains in Parliament as well. So this is something that is a trend that's occurring for everybody. I think, yes, you have to unite the right, as we say, and it's something that Boris Johnson did very successfully in 2019, but you also have to keep what is the traditional core where we've ceded to the Lib Dems. It's not an either or, and I think any new leader that sees it as such is inevitably going to fail.
We've heard from James Cleverly, haven't we, who's already said, look, I'm not going to serve in the shadow cabinet of either of the party leaders. What does that tell us about the bad blood within the Conservative Party that still seems to be bubbling over, Henry?
It's going to be a real challenge for the next Conservative leader, just because there's only about 121 Conservative MPs, and there's about that many shadow positions to fill. So if actually you have people, senior people like Jeremy Hunt, again, not serving in the shadow cabinet, you're going to end up with some Tory MPs with 2 or 3 shadow portfolios just to keep up the numbers. It's been, I can't think of a historical period when the Conservatives had this few MPs. It's going to be a real
I think we did have to do
challenge.
multiple jobs in 2001.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of period we're in.
I'm old enough to remember that.
Multitasking, right?
You can also see maybe those people are thinking, based on what you just said about how new leaders sometimes do, especially in a parliament this difficult, they're thinking take a couple of years on the backbenches. Then if the new leader comes a cropper and their shadow cabinet team comes a cropper, then you've got some clean skins who can maybe come in later. It's a very cynical positioning, but that's politics.
Very cynical, Henry. Yeah. How very dare you be cynical in the world of politics?
Well, in a different context, it's not cynical. I think it's actually about survival. And, the one thing that they always say about the Conservatives is, we like winners and we like surviving. And I think that instinct hasn't gone. And this is not just about, sorry to be a little bit sort of wet for a moment, but this isn't just about sort of the power of who's going to be leader of the opposition. This is about holding government to account.
Right.
And we do need to think about the integrity of the party, particularly in Parliament, and how we're able to do that effectively.
Let's talk a little bit about reform. The new leader will have reform to deal with in a political sense. How difficult is that going to be, Salma?
I think very difficult because, we've had Kemi Badenoch obviously rule out anything with Nigel Farage. I don't think the reform leadership is particularly interested in trying to create any kind of union with us in particular. They are very focused on Labour, in particular what we used to call the red wall seats. So I think that is something that's going to materialise in terms of the issues that we can perhaps collaborate on and show reform voters that we are not so far away from their beliefs and what they want.
Do you agree with that assessment?
The challenge with it is you can't really do a deal with the reform leadership. They would demand far too high a price, especially for the relatively small number of MPs they've got in Parliament. But reform voters, at least the majority of reform voters, not all of them, but say 3/4 of reform voters are people who in a good year would be voting Conservative. I think the vital thing for the party is to focus on making a pitch to those voters as voters rather than making a pitch to reform.
What's the difference?
Because if you're making a pitch to reform's leadership, that is all about parliamentary positioning, that is all about giving them deals where you stand aside and give them seats.
Yeah.
It's about giving them very specific policy commitments. Whereas if you're reaching out to centre-right voters and right-wing voters as voters, you're doing that on your own terms and you're trying to win them back on the merits of your case.
And the Lib Dem challenge is stronger now than it's been for a long time. What will that mean for the Conservatives? Because the Libs have taken quite a few key seats from them.
It pulls them in two directions for a start. The other challenge with that is because of the way the Lib Dems campaign, it will only make a lot of their MPs double down on the kind of hyper-localism, I'm basically a big councillor before I'm anything else style of politics, which can be quite locally effective, but it has, when they were in government, really stopped the Conservatives getting anything done, especially on housing, which is one of the big policy challenges facing the party. How do you get young people into housing so they have any kind of inclination to be Conservative? Well, that's very hard when all of your MPs are going, of course I support new housing, but just not where I am. If you have 120 MPs doing that, you don't end up building housing anywhere.
And attracting younger voters is going to be a challenge now, isn't it, Salma?
Well, and it always has been. I mean, for a lot of political parties, because even if you have the left progressives, getting them to be supportive is one thing, getting them to vote for you is another thing. But I don't disagree with Henry in that we have to have a policy appeal there that brings back younger voters, urban voters, if we're ever going to reach back into those seats. But, it sort of depends to be seen what strategy the new leader takes. And I'm sure, as a party member and an activist, I'll be taking a very a close look at what comes out from any kind of agenda for the new leader.
Henry, young voters, what are they saying to you?
They don't stop me in the street and give me their thoughts on the Conservative
Technically, you're still a young voter. You're a young voter yourself.
Actually, excuse me, completely correct. You are a young voter.
slightly tragic if that's the case. Basically, the Conservatives, in 2010, they actually got something like 30-something% of the 18 to 25 vote. It's completely possible to get a respectable share of young voters as a right-wing or centre-right party. But currently, they have absolutely no reason to do so. You know, they're paying a higher marginal rate of tax because of tuition fees than their older peers. They're paying a record share of post-tax income on rent. They're getting very little back. So the Conservatives need to have it's quite straightforward. It's an offer that makes economic sense for a young person to vote Conservative, something that will help them build up savings, something that will help them get on the property ladder, something that will maybe cut their taxes, something that our party is theoretically meant to be in favour of.
Do young voters not think, well, wait a minute, there's been 14 years of Conservative leadership. What have they done for me in that time? Surely they should have done that during that time.
So that is entirely the point, and this is why, you know, we can't compare this to, say, David Cameron's victory, because we've been out of power for a very long time. This is very fresh, and so being able to rebrand and rebadge and offer something new, and I totally agree with Henry, having that offer that is economically sensible is something that the new leader really has to get on with very, very quickly. And being able to lend a phrase, decontaminate the party from what has gone before is also going to be critical.
Just for decontamination of a party, as you put it, does one need to be more open to admitting that over the time that they were in leadership, potentially there were issues and mistakes were made? Because that's been something that, you know, Tory MPs
didn't really happen during the campaign. No, exactly. It's a real Rubicon moment, essentially, for any leader, because, you know, if nothing else, the Conservative Party went down to one of the worst defeats in its long history a couple of months ago, right? You have to reckon with why that was. Then there's the fact that, discounting Brexit perhaps, despite 14 years in office, the Conservatives got relatively little done that most Conservative members are happy about, right? Like there's not really many big Conservative achievements, so you need to have a reckoning with that. And the challenge is that if you've got a party that's already quite small, you're already struggling to fill shadow cabinet positions, how do you have that honest reckoning with the past, with the failings of the government, without alienating people who served in that government and whom you will be criticising?
We heard earlier on the BBC from former Conservative Special Advisor Claire Pearsall, who said that she's fundamentally depressed that neither leadership candidate has accepted where the party went wrong in the summer's general election. Do you agree with that assessment? Are you fundamentally depressed about it?
I think ultimately the issue is that we're all going to have a different view as to what went wrong. Having served in the last 14 years of the government, there are things that we can point to that are good as well. So I think, you know, we have to have a much more balanced approach as to what our record has been and what we want to do in the future.
Okay, well, I can hear the applause behind us in the room, and I think it means that the two candidates are being introduced ahead of that result readout. So we don't have long before we allow viewers to go to it. Quickly, one word, who's going to win?
I think Kemi.
Kemi.
Okay, let's go live.
Thank you to the thousands of Conservative Party members who have helped make this leadership election so engaging, and for the crucial role that our members played in putting all our candidates through their paces at events right across the United Kingdom. And a special word of thanks to all 6 candidates, to Tom, to Rob, to Priti, to Mel, to Kemi and to James, who put themselves forward and took the scrutiny of their parliamentary colleagues, the media, and most importantly, of members like you. Whoever is announced as our new leader needs our full support. We need to get back out in our communities, rebuild trust with the electorate, and show that we're on the side of people who want to contribute to society and get on with their lives. We all have a role in making that happen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our final 2 candidates for the leadership of the Conservative and Unionist Party, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. And now I would like to introduce the returning officer, the chairman of the 1922 committee, Bob Blackman, to announce the result.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I think the whole party owes a debt of gratitude to you as party chairman since the general election. I'd also like to thank another unsung hero, Stuart Andrew, who's been our chief whip. So we suffered a devastating defeat on the 4th of July, and on the 5th of July, Rishi Sunak decided he would step down as party leader. When I was elected as chairman of the 1922 committee, I was determined that we would have an appropriate opportunity to rebuild our party, consider where we're going, and ensure that we had a broad swathe of candidates to be the leader of our party. Some people said, let's have a short campaign and get it over and done with. Others said, let's have a long campaign into next year. So we reached a compromise. And I think it's fair to say that as a result of the parliamentary process, and indeed the excellent party conference we had, we made party conference a really exciting conference for representatives to attend. So when we decided the process to whittle down the number of candidates from 6 to 4 to send to the conference, that started obviously a process and ends today. Now, members obviously have had the opportunity to vote online and by postal ballot. Some people said they wanted the debate and the opportunity for the new leader to address the budget that we knew was coming. Frankly, I wanted to make sure that Rishi got that chance to give that speech on Wednesday. And Rishi literally eviscerated that rotten budget from a rotten government that it's our duty to replace as soon as possible. So I want to record my thanks to those hard-working and energy-crossing candidates, and also, of course, the team that have made this result possible today. So, before I announce the result, let me thank the party board, the National Union, and all the party staff, in particular Victoria Carslake, who will be leaving us after this particular event, to Civica Election Services for the professionalism they've shown in dealing with the ballots, in both distributing and collecting the votes, both online and by post. I'd also like to thank my Vice Chairman, Martin Vickers, and my Treasurer, Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, my fellow officers of the 22 who enabled the parliamentary process to proceed smoothly, and indeed my parliamentary assistant, Harriet Shoesmith, who did all the work behind the scenes to make the ballots possible in Parliament. And finally, of course, I'd like to ensure we give thanks to the party members. I was determined when we started this process that our party members would have the last word on who our leader should be, and they've done so. I'd like to thank Kemi and Robert for the way they've conducted themselves during this campaign. They've both been outstanding candidates and both worthy candidates to be leader of our great party. Now, the time that you've been waiting for, the result. So I, Bob Blackman MP, Chairman of the 1922 Committee and therefore returning officer for the Conservative and Unionist Party leadership election, declare that the total number of eligible electors was 131,680. The turnout in the election was 72.8%. The total number of votes rejected was 655, of which 610 were rejected because they were either unmarked or void for uncertainty, and 45 ballot papers rejected because they'd voted for more than one candidate. Quite tough in a two-person election. Anyway, the result was Kemi Badenoch, 53,806 votes, and Robert Jenrick, 41,388. Now the important bit. Therefore, I give notice that Kemi Badenoch is elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. I welcome her to the stage, and it's great, isn't it great, that we've got another female leader? And isn't it great that we're the first party to have a black leader of the party? Another glass ceiling shattered. But I welcome Kemi to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. And I want to start by thanking Richard Fuller for his work as our party chairman since July. And also Bob Blackman as returning officer for this contest. You and your teams have done us all a great service. Thank you. But I also want to pay tribute to everyone in the Conservative Party who has been involved in this very long campaign. It has been an experience none of us candidates will ever forget. Thank you for hosting us in your communities, in your village halls, in your pubs, and in your homes. It is the most enormous honor to be elected to this role, to lead the party that I love, the party that has given me so much. I hope that I will be able to repay that debt. There are so many people to thank. Firstly, my family, especially my husband, Hamish. Hamish, I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you for being with me every step of the way. I also want to thank Rishi. No one could have worked harder in such difficult times. Rishi, thank you for everything you did. We all wish you and your wonderful family the very best for the future. I'd also like to pay a special tribute to Robert Jenrick, who has fought a great campaign. Rob, we have all been impressed by your energy and your determination. You and I know that we don't actually disagree on very much. And I have no doubt that you have a key role to play in our party for many years to come. Thank you. I'd also like to thank all the other candidates, Priti, Mel, Tom, and James, for your kind words and your many insights. We have come through this campaign more united, and the party needs you now more than ever. The task that stands before us is tough, but simple. Our first responsibility as His Majesty's loyal opposition is to hold this Labour government to account. Our second is no less important. It is to prepare over the course of the next few years for government, to ensure that by the time of the next election, we have not just a clear set of Conservative pledges that appeal to the British people, but a clear plan for how to implement them. a clear plan to change this country by changing the way that government works. The Prime Minister is discovering all too late the perils of not having such a plan. That huge job begins today. It will seek to involve all of our colleagues in Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament, the Senate, our friends in Northern Ireland, as well as councillors and party members. But this is not just about the Conservative Party. It is about the people we want to bring back to the Conservative Party. It is about the people we need to bring into the Conservative Party. It is about what the Conservative Party needs to be over the next 5, 10, and 20 years. Our party is critical to the success of our country. But to be heard, we have to be honest. Honest about the fact that we made mistakes. Honest about the fact that we let standards slip. The time has come to tell the truth. The time has come to tell the truth, to stand up for our principles, to plan for our future, to reset our politics and our thinking, and to give our party and our country the new start that they deserve. It is time to get down to business. It is time to renew. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, that was Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the Conservative Party, who has just been announced. She's just given her maiden speech as the Tory party leader, and she's now shaking the hands of Tory MPs. She gave her husband a hug, a kiss, and a reference as well, thanking Hamish Badenoch for his help and support. Also congratulating her opponent, Robert Jenrick, on the campaign and on what she called his energy during the long campaign between the two candidates. So there she is, working the room, as we like to say. And I'm here with Henry Zeffman, our chief political correspondent, who has been watching with me. And it was a pretty close result, wasn't it, Henry?
The closest ever when Conservative Party members have had the chance to vote. I make it about 56% to 44%. That's a fair bit closer, actually, than Liz Truss beating Rishi Sunak, much closer than Boris Johnson beating Jeremy Hunt or any other ones you want to remember. But look, the big news here, just to make the obvious point, is Kemi Badenoch is now leader of the Conservative Party. That makes her the most likely next Prime Minister after Keir Starmer. There's all sorts of reasons why she might not be, but that is the simple fact of being leader of the opposition. She's extremely likely to lead the Conservatives into the next general election as their candidate for Prime Minister. That makes this a very big moment. The challenge for her, not just because the result was close, though partly because of that, but also because of how close the parliamentary stages of this contest were, will be forging unity in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, which we must remember is the smallest it has ever been in the Conservative Party's history. There's just 120 or so Conservative MPs. Kemi Badenoch now has a task on her hands to unite them after years of division, after several leaders in very quick succession, and find a way to present a coherent and different vision from the Labour Party to the country.
Have we had many clues about how she's going to go about to do that?
I think we certainly have in kind of her dispositions. She says she wants the state to do less, she wants the state to be smaller, and that will be a clear contrast, definitely, with this Labour government after Wednesday's budget, as a consequence of which, and Labour embrace this, the state will be bigger than it has been for generations. But she very consciously avoided, in the leadership campaign, taking clear positions on policies. Some policies, of course, but she almost defined herself against Robert Jenrick by saying he's being very specific about all sorts of things he wants to do. I want to get into office, I want to think about it. We don't know what the situation will be when the next general election takes place. So actually, in that sense, I think it's a lot less clear what Kemi Badenoch thinks about specific day-to-day controversies which she might now be confronted with as the Conservative Party's leader.
Okay, well, let's bring in our other two guests, Salma Shah and Henry Hill. We've been speaking to you before we went into the hall, weren't we? And it's good to have you both still here. Salma, if I can ask you, we saw the big cheer, we saw the standing O after the announcement was made. Obviously, there's always going to be that, whoever won. But do you think there's a palpable sense of relief, at the very least, that this is all done and dusted, as well as happiness?
Well, I think, yes, relief that it's done and dusted. Of course, as Henry said, the result was really close. So clearly there's going to be some bridge building that she's going to need to do. But for a moment, whilst I don't dispute your analysis at all, I think it's worth pointing out that the Conservative Party has just elected a British Nigerian woman to lead its party, and I think that is worth a mention as well. So I think there is some elation, particularly from people like me, who see that as an amazing thing. The tough work really does begin now. It's such a political cliche, but as I say, that result was close. Henry is right in saying that she is now, pressure is going to be on for her to put some flesh on the bones of that. But I think for the rest of today, I imagine lots of people here are going to be going to the pub, but certainly she's going to get to put her feet up for a
It's 11:21, Selma, come on. It's 11, it's a bit early, isn't it?
Licensing's open.
What? No, please. These are Conservative MPs. They'll be going for a cup of tea, I'm sure, and a slice of cake and a cucumber sandwich. Henry, sorry, that was just my imagination running wild. What's your analysis? Obviously, as Selma said, the first British Nigerian female leader of the Conservative Party, that we need to note that, that's important. But looking ahead at what she's going to do politically, she has her hands full.
Yeah, I think in deference to Kemi's famous dislike for identity politics, we should not make too much of it. But yeah, absolutely. Other than that, she has an extraordinarily difficult job because, on the one hand, to maintain the party as an operational force day to day, especially with several high-profile people refusing to serve in the shadow cabinet or saying they won't for now, you do have to, as you say, maintain unity. But unity crippled the last Conservative government because it didn't agree on anything substantial. And therefore, the only way that Rishi Sunak could maintain unity was not really doing anything. And I think this is going to be a trap that the Conservatives might fall into. If Labour keeps having a bad time in office, if their poll rating keeps sliding, if the policy difficulties mount up, there might be a temptation for the Conservatives to think, actually, we can let power come to us. We can let Labour wear itself out in office. We won't have to make those difficult decisions. And I don't think that's going to be at all credible with the voters. So Kemi is simultaneously going to have to try and keep the party together to maintain it in Parliament, but at the same time have what we were discussing earlier, those very difficult conversations about why the party lost office, why it achieved so little, why it didn't bring immigration down, why it didn't end up cutting taxes. And it's all very well to talk about principles, but the Conservative Party has never had difficulty talking about principles. The last Conservative government went to its grave saying that it was a tax-cutting, state-shrinking party, whilst raising taxes and increasing the size of the state every single year.
I think the first thing, and I don't dispute that, but the first thing that's going to happen is that she is going to have to appoint a shadow cabinet, notwithstanding what you've just said about the fact that there are going to be ministers few and far between, and there are going to have to be people taking on lots of jobs. That is going to be her hallmark to say, this is what I'm going to expect, and this is what I want people to deliver. And it depends whether she goes really broad within the different factions of the party, because even with 121 MPs, there are very distinct views, or whether she's going to try and create and hone her own vision, her own team that she wants to sort of drive that through.
And really interesting as well to watch what she offers Robert Jenrick. I think we got quite a clear indication in the speech there that she will offer him something. She said he has a big role to play in the future of the Conservative Party, but whether it's something that he will feel befits his status, because there's already big names saying they don't want to be in this shadow team. Rishi Sunak, obviously, but James cleverly said yesterday to the Financial Times that he would rather become a backbencher. So it will be really fascinating, not just who she wants to serve, but who is willing to serve in the jobs that she offers them.
Henry, thank you very much for your company, for bringing us through all that. Let me bring you guys back into this conversation now together, because I feel that you agree on a lot of points, but there are some key issues that I sense disagreement on. And one of those, I feel, is whether the future of the party is this broad base, or whether they need to actually unify in a much smaller base. What do you think, Sam?
I'm not sure that that's our dispute. I think the question here is about the tactics that we should play. There is always going to be this difficulty about how you unify different beliefs. And I think the critical thing that she can do in order to try and bring people with her is prove that she is a potential winner. And I see what you're saying around, Labour's polling going down, the potential for making big gains and sort of being subtle and sitting, taking a backseat to it. I think one of the reasons that she was elected, albeit by a small margin, was because she doesn't seem like the kind of person who's going to take a back seat. She will be forthright. And I know we're going to have to see, as I say, a lot more of that flesh put on the bones now that she does have that mandate to do it.
I don't think anyone really comes into politics saying we need a small base. The challenge is, how do you go about uniting your electorate, right? Because there's two ways of doing that. The one is reactive and additive, where essentially what you do is you simply poll people and then you try and put them together by appealing to them as they are. And the second is persuasive, where you build an intellectually and politically coherent case and you win people over to it. That's what Margaret Thatcher did. You know, Thatcherism was a completely new thing for conservatism, but it massively expanded the Conservatives' electoral coalition because it appealed directly to the material interests of millions and millions of new voters. I think that's the way that the Conservatives, if they're to regain office, need to go about broadening their base. It's not simply letting pollsters survey the public and then trying to cobble together a coalition from existing attitudes. It's creating a Conservative case that will just persuade millions of people who voted Reform, Labour, Liberal Democrat, that their best interests are served by voting Tory.
They're being pulled from so many different directions. That's so hard to work out where to look at first, where to concentrate on first.
I think where Henry and I probably agree on most things is that, the one thing that we probably do agree on is that leaders need to lead, and that's what we're going to expect of Kemi now, is that she shows leadership, and it is not just about sort of maybe sliding back in, on numbers into government, is that you actually take the fight to Reform, you take the fight to Labour, and you do it with that intellectual coherence and with the electorate in mind foremost.
Especially because otherwise Tory MPs, if she doesn't do that quickly, they will, as they did in the previous government, they'll fill that vacuum, those factions you were talking about, they will start imposing their agenda on a leadership that doesn't impose its own agenda first. So she really has to get on the front foot quite quickly.
What do you think ultimately is the time frame here? Because obviously we have a few years ahead of the next election, but there's going to be pressure very quickly falling on the shoulders of Kemi.
Yeah, so she probably has about a year and a half, 2 years on the outside. Labour, unless something miraculous happens, will be having a miserable time by then. Will be closer to the election, so their MPs, their backbench MPs, will be getting really restive. That's when the Tories need to be making damage on Labour.
Thanks to both of you. And I don't know if you saw just a second ago, Nigel Huddleston, Conservative MP for Droitwich and Evesham, who has joined me here. Thank you so much, Nigel, for joining us. A Kemi supporter,
yes.
So you must be very pleased. Talk me through how you feel right now.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm delighted for Kemi, I'm delighted for the party, and I'm delighted for the country. Now, Rob Jenrick is a huge talent, and I think we all saw during the election campaign how incredible he is as well. So he's got a lot to contribute, and the way he acted with great dignity and civility during the election campaign, I think deserves applause as well. But I'm really pleased Kemi has won. I've been backing her from day one. I worked with her really closely when I was a junior minister at the Department for Business and Trade, and I've admired her ever since.
Nigel, thank you very much indeed for that. Stay there with us, Nigel, because we're going to now say goodbye to our viewers on BBC Two. Those of you who want to keep watching this BBC special, please keep watching on the BBC News channel. But from me and the team here on BBC Two, bye-bye.